this Zoom seminar, and I've muted everybody. And I'm going to ask our speaker to unmute herself, and then also Beth Miller to unmute herself. And Beth can do the introductions. And folks are going to continue to jump in here. I'll be admitting them as meeting continues. So welcome, everybody. Take it away there, Beth.
Good evening, everyone. We are so excited to have this program tonight. I would like to introduce you to our speaker for the evening, Erin Rowan. Erin is zooming in with us from the other side of the state, where she works with Audubon Great Lakes, and she is the program director and a senior conservation associate with Audubon Great Lakes. She manages on-the-ground habitat restoration and bird monitoring efforts in conjunction with managing the Birds program, and she's here tonight to share how Michigan's secretive marsh birds, like the Virginia rail and the least bittern and the pied-billed grebe, are responding to local habitat restoration efforts, local, right here in Ottawa County. And several area birders have assisted in marsh bird surveys here in Ottawa County at Harbor Island and Stearns Creek and Bruce's Bayou in 2019 and 2021. Birds or My Birds is a public outreach program from Audubon Great Lakes and the Michigan DNR. So join us tonight, sit back and enjoy learning how local citizen scientists are helping birds, helping Birds or My Birds improve the quality of wetlands across Michigan for the benefit of marsh birds and their communities. Welcome, Erin.
Thank you so much, Beth, and thanks so much, everyone. Really happy to be here to chat with you today. I'm going to share my screen now. All right, can you all see that PowerPoint there? Looking good. All right. So thank you so much, Beth, as well, for the great introduction. Like she said, I am the Birds manager and a senior conservation associate with Audubon Great Lakes and Michigan DNR. I have been working here in Michigan since 2016 and have been with Audubon since 2018. Like Beth mentioned as well, Birds is an outreach and engagement program founded by Audubon Great Lakes and Michigan DNR. And our main goal is to increase all Michiganders' engagement in the understanding, care, and stewardship of public lands that are important for birds and people. And we do this a few different ways. We have a strong social media presence, so you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We also have a website and blog where we post monthly or sometimes bi-weekly blog posts on several different bird conservation topics here in Michigan, as well as across the Great Lakes region. And then we also engage Michiganders in community science, like Beth mentioned, as well as stewardship events and other outreach and engagement events. Due to COVID, most of our in-person programming was put on pause these last couple of years, but we continued to reach folks virtually with a series of webinars. And we have a few more coming up in March and April, so stay tuned to learn more about those. In addition to Birds and what we're doing here on the ground in Michigan, this last year, Audubon Great Lakes released our vision document on how we hope to restore the Great Lakes for birds and people over the next 10 years. We're really using this guide to help with our on-the-ground conservation work across the region, but here in Michigan as well, and you'll see kind of how this has mapped out what our priority areas are and how this all ties into the secretive marsh bird work we're doing in Ottawa County. As the largest freshwater ecosystem on the planet, the Great Lakes provides drinking water to over 40 million people, and the coastal habitats here in Michigan in particular are pretty incredible, supporting over 350 bird species. Climate change, though, as well as coastal development and invasive species, are continuing to threaten these communities and habitats. We've seen it out in Ottawa County, here in Southeast Michigan, where I am as well, with news of flooding and changing lake levels. But we're really ready to take action, and we have a really bold plan to make it happen. We know that healthy birds mean healthy communities as well, and we have science that tells us that regional populations of marsh birds have been declining, some as much as 90%. So it's really time to act, and securing a bright future for the birds and people of the Great Lakes region has never been more important. One thing about the vision plan that I want to mention is that science is guiding all of this work. Not only is it telling us that birds are declining, but it's also helping us focus our conservation and restoration efforts in the places that it's needed the most, that are most important for birds and people. So we are really focusing on those areas where we'll have the biggest impact. We're also planning to use this science in the region to help guide us on a path to long-term environmental health and climate resilience. So part of our plan, our main goal is to improve water quality and stabilize declining bird populations across the Great Lakes. That is a big, lofty goal. And the way we are hoping to do that is by restoring nearly 300,000 acres of high priority wetlands. And the Great Lakes, again, play a crucial role in a bird's life cycle, not just for breeding birds like our favorite piping plovers out here, but also the iconic and majestic bald eagles that have been doing so well in recent years. The Great Lakes really offer these resting and refueling zones during fall migration for millions of raptors, waterfowl, and wetland birds. And we're also seeing that these wetlands, of course, along our coastline, really providing us with a lot of benefits as well, filtering our water, storing our water, but also providing core nesting habitat for some of these secretive marsh birds we're going to talk about tonight. So I also wanted to mention a little bit of background on our bird status here in the United States, not just here in Michigan. But a couple of years ago, the 3 Billion Birds Gone report came out, and it showed us that birds are declining at a pretty good rate, or at least consistently since 1970. We've lost nearly 3 billion adult breeding birds since 1970, and this loss has been seen across bird guilds, across habitat types. So it's pretty concerning that we're even seeing a disappearance of even really common species. And overall, this indicates a general shift in our ecosystem's ability to support basic bird life. So this science is really showing us that we need to take some action. And here you can see some of our favorite winter birds, white-throated sparrows, dark-eyed juncos that have seen declines, as well as some of our grassland birds like the eastern meadowlark. Grassland birds are the guild that have seen the steepest decline and the largest decline. That a lot of grasslands have been lost, but this is the group of birds that's hurting the most. Migratory birds as well, some of these neotropical migrants like our warblers, Baltimore orioles, have also seen some great losses. Aerial insectivores like our barn swallows, tree swallows, have also seen declines since 1970. In addition to these overall population declines, in the 3 Billion Birds Gone report, Audubon released just a couple of months later the Survival by Degrees report, which indicated that 389 bird species are on the brink of extinction due to climate change. This report looked at 604 species, and 389 of them could lose many of the places, for some species up to 100% loss of their range of their home that they need to live by 2080. The good news is that our science also shows that if we take action now, we can help improve the chances for 76% of those species at risk. And that big loss of species, 2/3 of our bird species at risk of extinction, is in a 3 degree Celsius warming scenario, as opposed to just 1.5, which would help improve the chances for 76% of those species at risk. And here's an example, a couple of my favorite Michigan birds. We have the bobolink and the common loon. And as you can see, this is showing us how their range is going to shift due to climate change. And this is at that 3 degrees Celsius warming scenario. So this is the most harmful, that is going to cause the most change potentially. And we see that Michigan could potentially lose all of its bobolink, as well as the entire range of the common loon that falls within Michigan in the coming decades due to 3 degrees Celsius of warming. Great Lakes water levels have also been fluctuating dramatically in recent years, and this accelerates the spread of invasive species. It's also been flooding some of our own coastal communities, and it can disturb the natural ebb and flow of wetland water levels. We've also lost about half of our wetlands here in Michigan. So the loss and degradation of remaining wetlands from urban and agricultural development, invasive species, and climate change really pose the greatest threats to our local Great Lakes birds. Investing in these coastal watersheds now, especially wetlands, will really help create strongholds for these bird populations in the future. And it's not just the secretive marsh birds that are going to benefit, but also a lot of those migratory birds, the neotropical migrants we mentioned that are seeing declines, and even some of our more common bird species that are seeing declines. A lot of those birds will move through and utilize wetlands as resting and refueling zones during migration. So I'm going to dive into marsh birds a little bit more, specifically in the Great Lakes region and their population declines. We have seen from data from the Great Lakes Marsh Monitoring Program, as well as breeding bird atlas data, that these marsh birds are in decline. And here we have the black tern, common moorhen or common gallinole, Sora, and pied-billed grebe, all seeing a significant decline since 1995. And then we also have American bitterns, which seem to be stabilizing. And some of this may have to do with our water level changes, because American bitterns actually like some deeper or shallower water areas and some, actually that's why these guys are doing better. Sorry, I mixed that up. So least bitterns are increasing, we think, because of the deeper water that we've been experiencing in recent years, because they do like deeper water. With American bitterns, I'm not as sure as to thoughts as to why they're stabilizing. Virginia rails are still seeing some steady declines, and then swamp sparrows are another one of our focal marsh bird species that we pay special attention to, that is also stabilizing here in the Great Lakes. So these birds are our focal species, and we are doing what we can to protect and restore Great Lakes coastal wetlands for these birds that live there. They all have slightly varied habitat needs and likes, but the projects and programs highlighted in our vision plan will directly benefit these key species that have seen dramatic declines in the Great Lakes region, while setting the region on a path to long-term environmental health and resilience. So again, these Great Lakes coastal wetlands are important because they provide critical resources, not only for birds, but for people. We have lost greater than 50%. Oh, and I'm sorry, we have a Grand Rapids percentage here. You can see what your local percentage is in Grand Haven using an EGLE, Eagle's Wetland Trends Calculator, which is available online. You can enter your county, your township, and it'll show you how many acres or what percentage of acres of wetland have been lost since pre-colonial times. And we are battling ongoing degradation marsh bird population declines, and overall loss of ecosystems. And again, wetland benefits include things like shoreline stabilization for us, erosion control, storm surge protection and buffering, all of these things that have been really important these last few years, because so many of our large urban areas have been built on top of wetlands, or wetlands that were once there have also been developed on or lost in some capacity. So we're seeing more flooding in areas where if we could do some wetlands restoration or enhancements, we might be able to help prevent that flooding from happening and create some stabilization and long-term resiliency. So secretive marsh birds are indicator species. So this means that they are indicators of bioquality or habitat quality, bioindicators of habitat quality. So if their populations are doing well, it likely means that that habitat quality is high wherever they're living, because these birds in particular are sensitive to things like pollution, invasive species, and flooding. So monitoring these birds over time in specific wetlands can help give us an idea of the health of those wetlands. And as we work to restore certain areas in the Great Lakes, we can monitor throughout that restoration process to see if the work we're doing on the ground is making a difference and actually bringing the birds back. So I know I showed you some of our focal species and their population declines, but now we're going to go through these species and kind of chat about how you can identify them and where you can find them, because data that you submit in Ebird even, or if you are a part of our secretive marsh bird monitoring effort, is used by our scientists and local conservationists and partners like Ottawa County Parks and Rec to help with management planning. Sorry, my throat is dry. So here we have our cast of characters. The king rail, the Virginia rail, the common gallinole, the American coot, the Sora, or the loudmouth, least bittern, the sneaky one, American bittern, the noble one, and pied-billed grebe, the comedian. And all these nicknames either have to relate to the birds' names, an aspect of their behavior, or some other aspect of their natural history, how they stand, what their movements are. So the first on our list is the king rail. This is our largest rail, somewhat of a misnomer because the American coot actually weighs more, but this one is the largest of our typical rails. So these birds range across the southern portion of Michigan, but are still rare. This is a state endangered species. We're going to skip the audio just to save time, but some of the defining features of this bird are its size. So it is roughly twice the size of a Virginia rail. It's mostly brown as well, with streaking on the back, and it lacks that gray face patch of the Virginia rail and the more orange colored bill of that Virginia rail. So where to find king rails? They like fresh and brackish marsh, dense vegetation, so cattail and bulrush, and some open water. And then their behavior, they have some courtship displays. The males will walk about flashing their white undertail while giving their keck call. And then they lay 6 to 15 eggs in a platform or cup of dead grass and sedges above the water. After hatching, the young, as you can see in this photo, have thick black down feathers. And you can find them sometimes foraging, like here in the photo, along the edges of emergent vegetation in mud and water, looking for seeds, small fish, and mollusks. The pig is our next species, the Virginia rail. And this is from the Latin, or the name is from the Latin limicola, which is one that dwells in the mud. So that is why the nickname of the Virginia rail is the pig. I also find that some of their grunt calls can sound pig-like. So compared to the the king rail, the Virginia rail is about half the size, so much smaller bird. And as you can see, it has this bright orange bill, as well as this gray face patch or cheek patch. And those are really its definitive features. It still has some streaking down the back like the king rail, but it is smaller. Gray, yeah. And that gray face in particular is something that can stand out. So again, we'll skip the audio. If you are interested in listening to the audio files, I recommend All About Birds or Audubon's own online field guide. They have audio files, several of each species, so you can learn their calls. And I forgot we had some animations there. So where to find Virginia rails? Again, they like these freshwater as well as brackish marshes with emergent vegetation, but they prefer shallower water with mud flats. And they like to see 40 to 70% of interspersed vegetation with open water. So interspersion is kind of something that we are looking at closely too at a lot of our sites. A lot of secretive marsh birds really like something that's called hemi-marsh, which is where we have 50% of open water and 50% emergent vegetation. And then from there, we have specific species recommendations like this, where they have certain preferences that are a little off from the 50-50. But overall, that is one of the goals when you're looking out at a wetland. You want to see about 50% emergent marsh or emergent vegetation and 50% open water. So Virginia rail behaviors, again, for foraging, they'll be probing like the king rails. They're eating mostly insects and can use their wings to propel themselves underwater. The nest is placed in dry areas of the marsh or in a clump of vegetation above the water. And then during courtship, the males give a ticket courtship call in the spring, and then pairs can duet with that grunt call. And that's the call that I sometimes can associate with a pig sometimes as well, their nickname. We have the common gallinole, the jock. This is formerly known as the common moorhen. And common gallinoles, here we do have some animations, I believe. Yes, so they have this red face shield, and this is one of their definitive features. They are a slightly larger bird, about size and shape of a football, which is why I think we've nicknamed him the jock. And this is a bird species that you can find out in Ottawa County. Some of our volunteers have seen them out there. Habitat preferences, again, these emergent wetlands with half emergent vegetation, half open water, and they are often associated with cattail. They also forage a little bit differently than our rails. They mainly feed on grass and grass seeds and snails obtained from the water surface, as well as floating vegetation. Parental aggression with these birds is common. So if you are out kayaking and you happen to come across a family of gallinoles, do be aware and keep your distance. And a similar looking bird that sometimes can get confused with the common gallinole is the American coot, the popular one. Excuse me. So the American coot can be found throughout Michigan year round. But particularly in southern Michigan for the winter. So sorry, my throat is getting very dry. We had an all-day meeting earlier today that had a lot of discussion. Behaviors of American coots, one of the reasons we call them the popular one is because they form really large flocks during winter and migration. And then you see this extended splattering on the water surface when they're taking flight, like in this photo here. When they forage, they mostly dabble also on vegetation, but will also dive and dip their head under the water. Their nesting platform is usually built out of dead cattail. So Coot Facts, they have these beautiful lobed feet, and these provide balance while walking on mucky surfaces. They can sometimes steal food from other birds. And during the breeding season, they prefer marsh with deeper water and heavy stands of emergent vegetation, which you may not think initially looking at the bird. They can swim as well with these lobed feet, as do the common gallinoles. So yes, these are those two confusing species, similar coloration, similar body shape, but those face shields are very different colors. So again, the American coot has a white face shield and the common gallinole has a red face shield. Sora is the loudmouth. I love Soras. These are very small rails. And their defining features, they have this brown cap, gray face, and black mask down the front or bib. And then they also have that bright yellow bill. And that bill shape as well makes me think, I don't know why this is the case, but makes me think of candy corn, which is very sweet. And I find that the Sora's sound and calls are very sweet. So I just have that association with those key characteristics and how to identify it based on their looks and sounds. So their behaviors, they're out foraging for food, also probing muddy wetland edges for insects and seeds like our other rails. They can also swim and dive. Their nest is a woven basket above the water. And then their vocalizations, they are very vocal during migration and also during the breeding season. And they can respond sometimes to other loud noises or other birds calling. So this is a good bird to listen for if you're out in a wetland, especially during migration and the summer seasons. So introducing the sneaky one, the least bittern. I know many a birder here in Southeast Michigan that has been out looking for least bitterns, but has yet to see one and put it on their life list. These birds are indeed sneaky. They nest in freshwater and brackish marshes as well. They really like tall vegetation. And they forage on a really diverse diet of small fish, snakes, frogs, tadpoles, dragonflies, and more. Almost you name it, they eat it. Surprisingly, they also use areas of deeper water. So this is a smaller, our smaller bittern, hence the name least bittern compared to the American bittern. And so you might assume that they would prefer areas of shallow water. But they really enjoy deeper water and hunt from the emergent vegetation. Like you see this bird here using its long toes to grasp that cattail. And then they'll lean over open water and catch fish and other food from the wetland. So some of their defining features, they have these stripes down their chest. American bitterns also have these definitive stripes down the chest. And then least bitterns during the breeding season have this really dark cap and down their back, their cloak. The male's cloak is darker than the female's cloak. This bird in flight here is a female. It's more just dark brown. This one can get black to almost green looking. So sometimes it's easy to mistake least bitterns for green herons and vice versa. So those are two that would be good to learn and compare their definitive features and markings. And yes, the long toes. So I mentioned the long toes and that they like to hunt in this emergent vegetation. They also This is partly why they're so sneaky and hard to find. We'll just continuously move through and kind of live within that cattail. They're very good at walking between the emergent vegetation and staying hidden. So this is another one where you are more likely to hear it than see it, unless you're very lucky. So these two calls or audio files can also be found online if you're interested in listening to those. And then we have the noble one, the American bittern. This is our larger rail of the two, much bigger than the least bittern. This bird is also heard more often than seen, and its call can be heard up to 1,600 feet away, which is pretty amazing. I love their call. It's one of my favorites. They nest in freshwater marshes, again with tall aquatic vegetation, but with less dense vegetation and shallower waters than those least bitterns. So they may not be in the same wetland area, but they might be within the same wetland, just in deeper versus shallower areas. These birds forage, again, on a really diverse diet, similar to the least bittern, and they usually forage in dim light along the wetland edges. This is a bird that I have seen many times near wetlands, along roadsides or along the dike systems. If you're at an impounded wetland, right along that edge, they really like those wetland edges. So if you're searching for American bitterns, definitely keep your eyes to those wetland edges. And some of their defining features, like I mentioned before, same with the least bitterns. The American bitterns have this bold streaking down the chest. This is something that allows them to blend in really well with their surroundings. As you can see in this photo here, they can just keep their head upright where they can still see you, but they can be still or sway slightly in the wind to mimic the moving vegetation around them, and can sometimes be very, very hard to find. We also have the pied-billed grebe, or the comedian. This nickname is based on one of their vocalizations that sounds a lot like hyenas laughing. These birds are truly part submarine. They can trap water in their feathers and control their buoyancy. They live on bodies of flat, sluggish, fresh or brackish water, and forage in open water. They eat a variety of things as well, including fish, crustaceans, and aquatic insects. They also eat a large amount of its own feathers, and that helps with all of the shells that they're digesting from crustaceans or snails. And this can potentially prevent some of those hard prey parts from passing into the intestine. So they produce pellets similar to our owls and regurgitate those feathers with all of those hard parts inside. So pied-billed grebes, they are much smaller than you might think looking at a photo of them alone. So this is a great reference to see how small they are compared to a mallard. Because they can control their own buoyancy by putting water in their feathers. Some appear a little larger than others, depending on how buoyant they are at a given time. So that's something to keep in mind if you're seeing a bird that's very low in the water. It could be a pied-billed grebe that is either just coming up from diving or getting ready to dive down or just stay hidden. And its defining feature is this bill with the stripe through it. It's one thing to look for with these birds. And then one note, I just love these photos of them carrying their young on their back. We had a few families that were spotted out here in Michigan with young on their back. Oh, and I mentioned the comedian due to the hyena call, and that is even the nickname for the call. So if you want to listen to that one on your own, that's a good one to keep your ears peeled for when you're out in the marsh. So in addition to keeping our eyes on most of these focal species, we also have some secondary species that we like to look for. And that includes our friends, the coot that we talked about as a possible confusing species, the blue-winged teal, black-crowned night heron, marsh wren, and swamp sparrow. And then some less common secondary species that we are keeping an eye out for here in Michigan are the black tern and the yellow-headed blackbird. So I wanted to share all these birds with you in case you are out birding and in a marsh and happen to come across them. We definitely utilize Ebird data. That 3 billion birds gone report utilized Ebird data. It is extremely valuable to us, and we highly encourage you all to learn some of these focal species and go out to some of your local wetlands and let us know if you encounter them there. These are also the species you would have to learn if you are interested in volunteering with us. So stay tuned for more information about that. So going back to that question, outside of Ebird and the 3 billion birds gone report, how is this marsh bird monitoring data used? One example, which is what is guiding our Audubon Great Lakes Vision Plan, is that a lot of these observations have been put into what's called a spatial prioritization by the National Audubon Science Team. So they took local bird abundance records and observation records from folks going out in the field. They then looked at error and tried to account for that in their modeling, then compared it against satellite imagery of different habitat characteristics. So they looked at 10 different habitat characteristics against all of our focal marsh bird species to try to gauge where these birds are, and based off of some of those habitat characteristics and their preferences as well. So all of that together created this spatial prioritization, which is, these are the results of that on this map. So the areas that are really bright yellow, just glowing, are our high priority wetlands. These are wetlands that, as I mentioned, talking about our vision plan, are the areas that we have the most bang for our buck as far as conservation value. We can make the biggest impact in these regions for birds and people. So that translated into this, and these are our main priority regions here in Michigan. We have the Detroit-St. Clair River systems, Saginaw Bay, St. Mary's River and Straits of Mackinac, and Eastern Lake Michigan, where you all are. So the main thing we are working on out in Western Michigan and within all these priority areas is to improve these wetlands, particularly their health through invasive plant control, native plantings, cleaning vegetation, and water level management. So we have projects ongoing in each of these priority regions, the St. Mary's River Mackinac Straits, Saginaw Bay, St. Clair Flats, and Detroit River system, and also out in Eastern Lake Michigan. So we've been working with Ottawa County since 2018 to collect baseline marsh bird monitoring data at several sites to also help assess the restoration potential of Ottawa sands in the Sag. We've had volunteers like Beth and others that have been a part of this monitoring work. And we are really excited that over the last few years, since 2018, we've been able to drum up some excitement and foster stewards and advocates for Ottawa County's regional planning effort. So back in 2021, just last year, Audubon Great Lakes worked with Ottawa County Parks and over 20 other stakeholders to undertake an assessment and develop conservation recommendations for what we defined as the Grand River Coastal Corridor, which is outlined here on this map. The GRCC, Grand River Coastal Corridor, is an ecologically significant area, and it's really well positioned to connect people and wildlife across Grand Haven, Muskegon, and Grand Rapids through landscape scale natural area restoration and inclusive recreational access. So all of those wetlands that you saw that were just glowing yellow also fall within these areas here, as well as up north in Muskegon. And then we had our core area here that we looked at as far as some specific conservation recommendations. So chatting with all of these stakeholders, we identified these ecological threats specific to Ottawa County: habitat loss and degradation, invasive species, climate change, hazardous materials and pollutants, and a lack of diverse community engagement. So this overlaps greatly with the ecological threats that we're seeing across the region. The area is ecologically significant. This part of the Grand River Coastal Corridor here falls within an ecotone. So this is also known as a transition zone between different ecosystems, or between different regions that support dozens of different types of ecosystems. And so there's also a great level of biodiversity here, including species of conservation concern. It's actually home to the highest quality natural communities in the state, according to Michigan Natural Features Inventory report. And it's a migratory bird hotspot. That's what is depicted here on this map during spring peak bird migration. This is data that was picked up with radar. So this is showing that this bird, or this area, has been a bird migration hotspot for 6 years is the yellow portion, 5 years is the orange, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And we're likely going to see that shift as well due to climate change. And then during, this is during sunrise, so when a lot of birds take off to continue migrating, or others that are nocturnal migrants are coming in to rest and refuel. This is the kind of movement that's being detected, also showing that this area is along the coastline is very significant for these migratory birds. The coastline also falls within a globally recognized Audubon Important Bird Area, which is recognized for supporting thousands and thousands of migratory and overwintering waterfowl. And then the core area that we mentioned and showed previously, it's a little smaller, is composed almost entirely of top 20% designated wetlands, critical for marsh bird conservation here in the Great Lakes region. The corridor also supports significant numbers of migratory birds each spring and fall, and serves as, this migratory hotspot. The corridor also provides ecosystem services to the communities around it in the form of stormwater and carbon storage, water filtration, and more, making it extremely climate resilient. This is a map that the Nature Conservancy put together. It's a mapping tool that you can explore yourself online. You can zoom in and turn it on and off different layers of data. But this shows us that a lot of these areas that fall within our coastal corridor are most resilient or more resilient. And then all of the gray, which is also quite large, these are areas that are developed. So it's really important to conserve our remaining resilient areas here for these local communities. The corridor is also state recognized as an important area for lake sturgeon and for in-stream conservation and restoration for other fisheries. It also holds a lot of cultural value for local tribes. And the top 20%, again, wetlands for secretive marsh birds. Slide was a duplicate. There we go. So this is the map that shows those top 20% of wetlands. So everything that is outlined in these little squares represents wetlands that are within that top 20% that we want to continue to conserve and enhance and restore for secretive marsh birds. And the blue represents protected areas and the white represents unprotected areas. And then farther north in Muskegon, we have some wetlands as well that fall within that top 20%, leading into Muskegon State Game Area here. So the results of this report were to help identify some priority areas for wetlands conservation. And these are some of the properties that we highlighted, including Ottawa Sands County Park. We also wanted to outline some conservation recommendations for land managers to move forward on. I'm realizing we might be getting close to running out of time, so I might move through this. But we want to, moving forward, continue to engage the stakeholders that we interviewed as part of this report. We want to also create outreach strategies and programming that will help educate the public on the benefits of the corridor, but also engage the public in the stewardship and monitoring efforts happening within the corridor. And then we want the stakeholders to do some conservation design planning for the entire corridor. So that's the big long-term hope. These are some of the collaborators on the report, including that long list of stakeholders. And with that, I wanted to dive into some of our upcoming work. We have obtained funding through Sustaining Our Great Lakes to continue working with Ottawa County Parks and Recreation at Ottawa Sands County Park to restore 42 acres of shoreline around the inland lake there, as well as restore some wetlands at that site. And this work aligns with the Ottawa Sands Master Plan and is one of the priority areas identified in our Coastal Corridor Report. This wouldn't be possible without our partners at Ottawa County Parks and Rec, Michigan DNR and Gun Lake Tribe, as well as our volunteers for getting back out there and continuing monitoring as we take on this next phase of our work in Ottawa County. We also wanted to share that we have obtained funding, again, in partnership with Lower Grand River Organization of Watersheds, Western Michigan Environmental Action Council, Groundswell and Ottawa County Parks and Rec, to help with some of that community engagement, which we identified as an important next step, and to also help continue that stakeholder engagement so we can continue to bring all of these community leaders, land managers together and community partners to do some of that conservation design planning for the entire corridor. So what are things that we can all do to kind of help these birds and help some of these projects? So one of the things that I like to share is that it's really up to us to care for these natural areas. They're critical for birds and wildlife, but also for our own quality of life. And with a lot of areas like state game areas, state wildlife areas, many of which double as important bird areas, hunters have historically supported those state lands conservation and management, but hunting is on decline. So the future of some of those state wildlife and game areas like Muskegon State Game Area or Grand Haven State Game Area is a bit uncertain. So it's really up to the rest of us to step up to the plate and help conserve some of those lands and waters that we all need to thrive. So one way you can do that is supporting local conservation organizations, supporting your public lands by purchasing a duck stamp or participating in the Adopt a Game Area program, which will help contribute directly to state game and wildlife areas that double as important bird areas. You can also use eBird when birding, like I mentioned, particularly if you visit an important bird area. There are a lot of information gaps with several of our important bird areas because a lot of them are state game or wildlife areas, and not a lot of birders either know that they are there or know that they are accessible to them during spring and fall, any time outside of the hunting season. We also recommend talking to your legislators about what is important to you when it comes to natural resources, and participate in public input sessions. I'll share a couple of links with you in the chat for a couple of opportunities that are coming up. And then also participate in stewardship events. Ottawa County Parks and Recreation hosts several. MI Birds and MUCC typically co-host some. We are hoping to get some more of those events on the calendar in 2022. We also need volunteers this year. We have some routes available in Ottawa County to survey for secretive marsh birds. If you are interested, you can contact me directly. My last slide will have my email address on it. And we're hoping with our continued work with our partners over the next couple of years, we'll be able to expand into Muskegon and Kent counties. So there could be opportunities as well coming up that are closer to home. We have also some black tern observations. So we have a statewide black tern monitoring effort that is happening, and a couple of our survey areas are near Grand Haven. But we also are just asking folks to share any black tern observations they have, whether they're traveling or close to home in eBird, and then to also share that checklist with this specific eBird account, MIBLTE survey, Michigan Black Tern Survey, as we are trying to collect as much data as we can about where black terns are currently actively nesting here in Michigan. So I wanted to provide you with my email address. If you're interested in learning more about volunteering with MI Birds and Audubon Great Lakes, feel free to email me directly. To learn more about our upcoming events, we have a couple of webinars later in March and April that are on the calendar. You can follow us at MI Birds on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, or visit our website at gl.audubon.org/MI Birds. And then Michigan DNR also, if you haven't seen it yet, just in the last year has really updated their birding page. So it's got links to all of the birding trails in Michigan and some other really great birding resources. And with that, I will open things up for questions. Let's see. Great, thanks for the question, Kelly. So for the monitoring that we mentioned, these would be permanent monitoring stations in the GRCC that are monitored from year to year to see trends. For birding experience, we do offer a training session, and we try to give folks a month or two before the breeding season as well, so they can continue to practice and learn these calls. You also have to learn how to estimate distance by sight and sound. So that's something that we can work on as well at the training session. We're hoping to have an in-person portion again this year. And our protocol is very similar to the Great Lakes Marsh Monitoring Program, but it is a little different. It's something that's been used here in Michigan and across the Great Lakes region specifically as part of a larger Great Lakes monitoring effort in the States. Yeah, I think we might even, with the expansion of monitoring, we did chat about maybe doing Great Lakes Marsh Monitoring in some of the other counties. So that is a possibility as well. There are some routes that need filling for that program that are in your area. So I would recommend looking at their website as well if you're interested in doing surveys with them. They also need amphibian surveys or frog and toad surveyors for the wetlands on their list as well.
Thank you, Erin. I have a question. You showed a map of the Lower Grand River, and there were different colors for the protected versus unprotected regions. The Owashtanong Islands, which are actually, I believe, owned by partly by Michigan Audubon, are in the unprotected designation. What's the difference between, I guess, protected against what? What are the protection levels? And then why are those islands not considered protected?
That's a good question. So with the gap, there were two different scores for unprotected, and one really stands for unknown versus unprotected. So it's possible, they're the same color though. So it's possible for those islands, it could be unprotected, or is it partially? I'd have to go back and look at the specific map, but I know there were some that were like partially owned by private individuals versus, or some LLCs versus the Michigan Audubon portion. So I think we had to designate it as unprotected with the individual private ownership, not knowing, if the area would be conserved. It's not currently as an area for conservation or preservation. Any other questions?
If there are other questions, please go ahead and unmute yourself and ask Ms. Rowan for information.
Yeah, and I do apologize. I realize that I didn't include summaries of what our volunteers have seen out in Ottawa County. So I'd be happy to share those with you. I can send those after the fact. You can see which sites are most productive as well. I think Stearns Creek is one of our good ones. Bruce Bayou, I think, has the highest diversity. Ottawa Sands is going to change a lot over the next few years, so that could be an exciting site to survey. Yeah, we have some good species present.
Erin, I have a question. We have a number of our OIAS members who have been out kayaking Spring Lake area, and I know there's plenty of opportunity upriver. I live on Potawatomi Bayou, and I'm wondering how beneficial is it for ebirders to be out observing from the water for these target birds compared with hiking trails in our parks that we know have marsh areas?
Yeah, that's a great question, Cindy. Most of our marsh bird monitoring routes in Ottawa County are kayak based or water based. So I would say it's important to be out on the water as well if you're able to. Marsh birds are most active at dawn and dusk. So if you can't get out super early in the morning, our volunteers have to get up and get started a half hour before sunrise. So it is a bit of a big ask in that sense. But if you can get out in the afternoon and keep your ears and eyes open for those birds on the water too, that would be great. And just be aware of your surroundings as far as possible nesting locations and maintain a distance from any active nests.
Are there any other questions? I'm looking in the chat here.
Yeah, I see the one from Lucas. So that's a great question about grassland birds. He's asking, are there any initiatives by Great Lakes Audubon and Michigan Audubon for grassland birds? I'm not sure about Michigan Audubon. Audubon Great Lakes is doing some work with grasslands in the Chicago area. So in Illinois, where our main headquarters is based, and we've been there on the ground a little bit longer than we have been here in Michigan. They are doing work with grasslands. They are doing active restoration. They have a big stewardship program. They do prescribed burns and other herbicide treatment of invasive species to maintain these grasslands. But we don't currently have any grassland work happening here in Michigan. I'm hoping to see that happen one day, but Pheasants Forever is doing amazing work with our grasslands here in Michigan. So if you're interested in learning more about some of the conservation work they're doing, and I know some of the Ottawa County parks has some good grassland habitat as well. Just near, well, farther south, if you go out to Allegan State Game Area, it's enormous. It's got a great diversity of habitats, but it has some wonderful intact grasslands, and you can see Henslow sparrows there. And that's one of the sites Pheasants Forever has restored on and off over the last decade. Welcome.
Well, I would like everybody to thank our speaker and really appreciate your time and expertise, sharing your information with us. I will be getting this will be recording will be posted on our website. I believe also there'll be access to it via our Facebook page. Thank everybody for dialing in. So thanks so much, Ms. Erin, for your excellent presentation. And I'm going to stop recording now.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I just realized as well that I didn't put the links in the chat for some of those public input sessions. So I'll include that with my data summaries. But for those of you that are still here, if you want to see those, this is one, which is for the Lower Grand River watershed resilience planning process. So very local. And then we have Michigan DNR. They post requests for public input on their management planning efforts. So feel free to participate in those or any public hearings or meetings.
Excellent. Yeah, and the chat will be saved and included with the recording.
Okay, great. Well,
Great.
thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Thanks everybody for dialing in. And next month, I believe will be a live birds presentation in person in the Laudet District Library. So make sure that you are attending for that. There'll be announcements in the library webpage as well as on our newsletter and our Facebook page. So look forward to seeing everybody in person next month in March at the Laudet Library.